Hello, everyone. Welcome. So good to see you here. Welcome to the ELT Journal Debate at IATEFL. My name is Alessia Kogo. I'm the editor of the ELT Journal. And how many of you know about the ELTJ or have heard about it? Can you raise your hand? Oh, good. You are a very well-informed audience. Yes. Thank you for being here. This is actually our annual event. Every year we have a debate on a different topic. And I want to thank IATEFL and the organizers for really hosting us every year and making space for a different debate and a different discussion on an important topic. But this year we actually cover a topic, international standardized assessment, that has been covered before. It's not the first time that we have a debate on assessment. We actually had a debate in 2015 on the motion, I don't know if you remember it, it was, now I'm trying to remember it as well, testing does more harm than good. I don't know if you were here in 2015, and the person who proposed or was for the motion was Richard Smith. I don't know if Richard is here, can't see it. And the person who opposed the motion was Tony Green. And it was a very animated debate, and they were amazing speakers. You can actually find the recording of that debate on the British Council website. But this is 2025, 10 years on, and the debate is still very current. And we felt that there were new aspects to the debate, AI, EDI, other things going on, that we felt it was important to actually revise or revisit that debate. An international standardized assessment, and this is the motion actually, this House believes that international standardized assessment benefits both learners and teachers. We felt international standardized assessment at the moment is discussed because, of course, it's very useful to compare students' results in different regions, to think about educational environments in different parts of the world, and also inform language policy at national, international level. But also it brings with it a lot of challenges and controversies as well, in terms of does it really test our students' abilities? Does it really tell us something about, is it sensitive to their cultural background, to where they are from, to their individual abilities, and how does it impact our teaching and their own learning? So these are all aspects of the debate that we want to delve deeper into with our expert speakers. So let me tell you a little bit about the debate and how it works before I introduce the speakers. How many of you have been to an IATEFL debate before? Okay, some, like half of the audience, I think. Good, okay. So for those who haven't been here, I'll tell you a little bit how it works. First, the first speaker will talk for the motion, supporting international standardized assessment. The second speaker will speak for another 15 minutes each. 15 minutes against the motion, against international standardized assessment, and then it's your time. So the audience will ask questions, will bring comments, feedback to the speakers, but they don't respond to you straight away. They will take notes, and then they will respond at the end. Each one has got 5 minutes to address your concerns, your questions, and bring together their point. And then it's your time again. You will vote for the speaker that convinced you, the one you think you are going for. And we have a winner at the end. Okay, we'll see how it goes. Ah, you see, all at the end in good time. Okay, let's move on. Let me introduce you to the speakers. The first speaker for the motion is Professor Barry O'Sullivan. Professor Barry O'Sullivan is Director of English Language Research at the British Council and has been involved in language testing for 30 years. He has worked on the development and validation of the British Council's APTIS test, and more recently, the conceptualization of the socio-cognitive model of test development and validation. He is the founding president of the UK Association of Language Testing and Assessment, and is a visiting professor at the University of Reading in the UK. And our second speaker against the motion is Professor Sin-Wang Chong. Professor Chong is Director of Research and Director of Impact and Innovation at the International Education and Lifelong Learning Institute, University of St. Andrews. He is also visiting professor at King's College London and the Educational University of Hong Kong, and top 2% researcher in education in 2023 and 2024. His work focuses on turning evidence into practical insights for teachers and policymakers. He is co-editor of Review of Education and founding editor-in-chief of Research Synthesis in Applied Linguistics. So you can see we've got two fantastic expert speakers on this topic. And let's start with, for the motion, Professor Barry O'Sullivan.
Good afternoon. How are you doing? That was pretty weak. See the tester in me. I was testing you, you failed. Okay. I've been told that if I steal extra time, Sin-Wang gets extra time as well, so I better behave myself. How many of you think I should defend the motion? Well, that's really good, because you're not going to be too offended then when I don't even try. Because the reality of the world that we live in is that there are good things and there are bad things. There are good tests, there are bad tests. There are good people, there are bad people. Whatever we say. International standardized tests or assessments are fine if they're appropriate tests and they're used in an appropriate way. And that's what I'm going to defend. The other ones, you've read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I hope everybody in the world should have read it. The concept of SEP, somebody else's problem. The best kind of problem to have is somebody else's problem. It's somebody else's problem to defend bad tests or any test that's used inappropriately. Right, that's number one, out of the way. Number two, when I talk about international tests, I'm talking about a test that gives a person a passport to international opportunity. Whether that's work or study, it's up to you. You can decide for yourself. In terms of standardized has been around for a long time. In fact, I'm a bit disappointed that my wonderful colleague here is actually against the motion, considering that in 605, the Chinese invented standardized testing. And about 1,300 or 1,250 years later, the rest of the world caught up with China. So we've had standardized tests for a long time. So what are standardized tests? Some people look at standardized tests as a test that's multiple choice. That is an old style, old-fashioned, out-of-date idea, a concept that you should wipe from your brain right now. A standardized test is essentially a test that's consistent. And it's consistent in terms of design, it's consistent in terms of development, delivery, scoring, reporting, and in terms of the experience that any test taker has when they go into that test center. So when I'm talking about standardized, that's what I mean. Standardized is good. If you think standardized is bad, you've got a real problem. The reason we have standardized tests, and the reason the Chinese figured out whatever it is, nearly 1,500 years ago, that we needed standardized tests was tests that were not standardized or non-standard tests were different for everybody, so you could never make any judgments about people. So you could never find the right people to do the right jobs for you in any occasion. So right, that's number one, number two, and number three. If you're against me still, you might be in the wrong place, my friend. If you know the Bob Dylan song, if you're in the wrong place, my friend, you'd better leave. So right, that's the basics line. We're only talking about appropriate tests used appropriately. You can have the most wonderful test on the planet, but if you don't use it appropriately, it's useless. Right? So we're not going to talk about those. Right, what am I going to talk about? That's me. I'm going to talk about, what I'm supposed to talk about. Oh, I've lost track of time now. You're keeping time. That's not good enough. I'm supposed to talk about the benefits. Well, when I was thinking about the benefits, I was thinking in terms of a few different things. If you think about one of the benefits that these large-scale tests have is that they have the resources to put into identifying the construct that's being assessed very clearly, and then making that construct very clear to the people who are going to actually sit the test. So that's one of the things. The other thing that they have is this consistency, which I'll come back to over and over again, because consistency is really important. And the final thing, I suppose, is opportunity. So if we think of the first, the benefit, let's say, to a teacher of knowing that the construct of the test is very clear. The benefit to the teacher is that that teacher knows exactly what to do to help their student. There's no messing around. You don't go that way, you don't go that way, you go right down the middle. You know exactly where to go. Now, Catherine mentioned this morning about people teaching to the test. Not always a wonderful thing to do, but if you've got a class that you're preparing for a test, you'd better teach to it. It's your job to teach to it. One of the reasons I got into testing in the first place is that I realized very early on that a big part of my job as a secondary school teacher in Ireland, almost 50 years ago now, was to get my students through the tests. Because if I didn't, I'd failed in their eyes and in their parents' eyes and in my boss's eyes. So I did everything I could to get them to pass. So it's really important. How do I do that? I do that by knowing that what the test is aimed at, how it's going to get there. I know that it's going to be consistent in terms of it's not going to vary from year to year. I know what that test is going to look like, so I can prepare my students, I can prepare my classes in that way based on that consistency and based on the clarity of the construct. I also know that the fact that there is this opportunity that is aligned with the test, especially these international assessments, there's an opportunity that's aligned with those in the minds of the students, and that's going to motivate the students. So you can help those students to gain motivation to get them over that line. In terms of the student, it's blindingly bloody obvious what the reason students should be happy with international standardized assessments is because it opens the door to an opportunity that they would not necessarily have. So if you come from a background where you either have not had the education opportunities or you haven't taken them. I left school when I was 15 because I hated the place. I was useless at it. I wanted to get out. I worked in a factory for 4 years and then realized, because I'm a bit slow, it took me 4 years to realize this is a bloody mistake, man. So luckily I was able to take exams, not international standardized exams, but local standardized exams. That helped me get back into the system, and here I am today. You have to listen to me. However, many people in this room, I'm sure, have benefited from the fact that they were able to sit these international assessments, and those doors were then opened to them. The fact that the construct of these tests is so clear for the student, they know what to expect. They know where the bar is. If the bar is set at this high, they know how to get over it. They know that's where they've got to go. So you have this consistency. If you've got a clear construct, you know exactly what's going to be in the test. You know it's not going to change. You also know that because of this whole consistency thing that it's going to be fairly marked, you're not going to get bias. So in terms of all of these elements, we're looking at the same things can affect. I've only taken 3. When I started to think about this a couple of months ago, when Alessia asked me to talk about this, I had a list of about 14 different things, and I thought, if I start talking like that, I'll never finish. I'm not able to speak fast enough to get through 14 points. All I want to do is highlight some of the various points that are in favour of international assessments. If we don't have them, we close the door for too many people. If we do have them, we've got to build them well, we've got to design them well, we've got to deliver them well, we've got to interpret them well, and we've got to defend them. We've got to make the opportunities open to all people. So for me, the final point of my argument will be that international standardized assessments done well make the opportunities for people. They see individuals. They don't see the people who take the test as a number. They see each person is a person. Each candidate is an individual who you've got to focus on completely with your test, so that result matters to that person and they're getting the result they deserve. You can do that, and it takes investment, it takes time, it takes energy. I've been accused over the years of putting down local tests because local tests don't have the same access. 5 minutes, that's very generous. Local tests, you put me off now.
Sorry.
I couldn't believe I had 5 minutes left. I thought I had about 1. But I have loads of time. I can slow down a bit. Look, people say that I'm too hard on local tests by saying that locally developed tests need to be developed to the same standard as international standardized tests. Well, I'm really sorry, but they have to be. If they're going to be used for a high-stakes purpose, you've got to make sure that your design and your consistency and your definitions and your construct are all done to the same level of accuracy, professionalism, and consistency as the international tests. If they're not, you're really not helping your students. You think you are, but you're not. The main reason we have the standards is that everybody should reach them. Now, not everybody has to reach the highest level, and you know, we might hear from my learned colleague that these tests tend to be quite expensive, and of course they are. But if you actually look at why they're so expensive, a huge amount of that expense comes from the security of the test. And because of the security, the tests are trusted. And because the tests are trusted, the doors are there to be opened. Without that trust, you don't have a test. So the major tests like IELTS, TOEFL, these tests, they're accepted by 10,000, 11,000, 12,000. Every time I read the numbers, they tend to be different, but they're all well over 10,000 institutions around the world. They're accepted because they're seen as, number one, being trustworthy, and number two, as being accurate representations of the ability of the candidates that sit the test. If you get all those bits right, you don't need any more. I don't think I need any more time. I think I've convinced them. Look at them. When you were talking first, every time she said something negative, you all went, no. But now I can see you've changed your minds, and I can see I don't need to say any more, so I can say goodbye. Over to you.
Great introduction, and great to go already introducing the topic of standardized assessment in that detail. And now we have the opposite perspective. So let's welcome Professor Sin-Wang Chong.
Good afternoon, everybody. One thing I can guarantee you is I'm not going to be as charismatic and humoring as Barry, but I hope it will be an informative reflection. The motion today is that high-stakes language tests are beneficial to learners and teachers, not test takers, not test developers, not governments, not schools or universities, but learners and teachers. So let's begin by listening to the voices of those directly affected, the learners and teachers themselves. Let me share with you a quote from an autoethnography published in TESOL Journal in 2025 about the disillusionment of a language teacher nearing the end of their training. They said, "I felt disempowered as a novice teacher, teaching to the test while trying to meet the expectations of my students, their parents, and my supervisors. This early experience helped me sense the gap between the idealist knowledge base of pedagogy that I learned and the materialist realities of being a frontline teacher." If that quote resonated with you, it's because many educators have been in that exact situation. But let's not stop at anecdotal evidence. Let's look at the numbers. According to global education reports from the World Bank, the United Nations, and UNESCO, a significant percentage of students experience anxiety, stress, and even burnout due to high-stakes testing. A study from UNESCO reported that over 75% of students in standardized testing systems associate these assessments with negative emotions. This raises an important question. If a tool meant to support learning induces stress and disempowerment can we truly call it beneficial? I believe everyone in this room has either been a language teacher, a teacher educator, or a test taker. We are all familiar with the power that language tests hold. So before I present my arguments, I'd like you to answer these questions in your heart, honestly, with a simple yes, no, or maybe. Do high-stakes tests like IELTS make you a more professional and competent teacher? Do these tests make your students better language users in real-life settings? Now that we've reflected on our experiences, let's turn to the evidence. In 2008, John Hattie published a synthesis of over 800 meta-analyses covering more than 50,000 studies and 80 million students globally to determine the impact of different instructional influences on learning outcomes. The study found that while an effect size of 0.40 represents the average impact of an educational intervention, high-stakes tests scored a mere 0.28, placing them among the least effective strategies. Even in his most recent 2023 analysis, covering over 2,100 meta-analyses, Hattie reached a similar conclusion. High-stakes tests do not do very well in enhancing learning. This suggests that despite their widespread use, high-stakes tests, including language tests, are not particularly effective at improving learning outcome. But why? Let's acknowledge the obvious. Language tests are designed to help. They aim to provide a standardized framework for assessment, to motivate learners, and to prepare them for real-world communication. Barry, my opponent, has expertly presented these benefits. If today's motion were that high-stakes language tests are intended to benefit learners and teachers, I would wholeheartedly agree. But today's debate is about actual benefits, not just good intentions. To illustrate, let me share a personal story. When I was visiting the National Institute of Education in Singapore, I observed a teacher training session on giving feedback. Let's have a look at a picture that I took. Not this one. I'll give you maybe 30 seconds. All right. As you can see, the instructor meant well, guiding students to eliminate unnecessary information in their writing, yet the student misinterpreted the feedback. The intention was good, but the outcome is a misunderstanding that did more harm than good. And let's not even mention the conversation that the teacher had to have with the parent afterwards. Let me give you another illustration using me as an example. The intention of today's debate is for the two speakers to engage in a collegial and professional discussion on a topic. It's meant to be relaxing and conversational. However, to me, this can be a very stressful event, especially I'm speaking against a very experienced and highly respected colleague like Barry. To cope with this, I decided to write down what I'm going to say for my 15-minute speech. And this is why you see me holding my script. I never write scripts for presentations, but I feel the need to with this event. Intention versus reality. As simple as that. Similar to these examples, language tests intend to promote teaching and learning, but what actually happens? Teachers are pressured to teach to the test, prioritizing exam techniques over genuine language development. Students in turn, fixate on drilling past papers and memorizing vocabulary and expressions, often at the expense of their well-being, with some even trying to game the system. So we must ask, is this a system that truly benefits teachers and learners? Let's shift our focus to the social justice implications on high-stakes tests. These exams reinforce outdated colonial views of language education. Concepts like native speakerism and standard English dictate what is deemed correct, reinforcing linguistic hierarchies. Ian Cushion, a researcher at Manchester Metropolitan University, has done some great work on racial linguistics, exploring how linguistic, racial, and national boundaries categorize and suppress the marginalized. Even today, these biases persist in language assessment, favoring certain dialects and accents over others. In their paper published in TESOL Quarterly, Talia Isaacs from UCL and Heath Rose from the University of Oxford argue that native speakers continue to be the benchmark for assessing language proficiency. But why? Why should second language learners be evaluated against a native speaker model instead of being recognized for their ability to communicate effectively in diverse environments? The global conversation and dialogue is shifting towards English as a lingua franca, towards translanguaging, towards valuing intelligibility over accent, yet high-stakes tests remain rooted in outdated paradigms. Even within the language testing community, voices are calling for its decolonization. Ilana Shohami talks about the deep political, ideological, and societal forces that shape language assessments, what she calls the hidden agenda. Let's be clear, high-stakes language test is not just an assessment tool. It is a gatekeeper, a force that upholds existing power structures. It determines who belongs, who succeeds, and who is left behind. And unless we acknowledge its biases and challenge its underlying agenda, we risk perpetuating inequality rather than fostering inclusivity. And then there is the financial aspect. The British Council, which Barry works at, alone made £601 million from language testing services in 2022 to 23, a 17.2% increase from the previous year. IELTS preparation services like the IELTS Coach online charge up to £527 for personalized test preparation. Duolingo English Test and TOEFL also offer expensive preparation packages, creating an industry where success is often dictated by financial privilege rather than linguistic competence. The reality is that students from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds face significant barriers, further widening the gap between privileged and underprivileged learners. While reading an exam paper from the 1965 postgraduate certificate in education at the University of London, which is almost 60 years ago, I came across this thought-provoking question. Students were asked to comment on this statement, which I'll read to you right now. The comprehensive school does not aim at making all men and women equal, but it does aim at giving everyone an equal opportunity to be unequal. That statement was expressed 60 years ago, yet it still resonates, especially in the context of international English testing. Education and testing may promise a second chance for all, but if the resources to succeed are accessible only to some, can we really call it an equal opportunity? And what about teachers? Non-native English-speaking teachers, or as I would like to call them, native users of English, face undue scrutiny because of the same biases. Despite being highly qualified, they are often perceived as less competent than their native-speaking colleagues. Beyond social injustice, let's consider relevance. High-stakes tests still largely assess language through the traditional 4 skills. But in today's world, language is multimodal. We text, we use AI-powered tools, we communicate through images, emojis, voice notes, we navigate virtual augmented realities and interact in multilingual spaces. Yet these exams lag behind, failing to capture the complexities of real-world communication. Some universities are beginning to rethink language assessment at an institutional level. Take the University of St. Andrews, where I work, as an example. Instead of relying solely on standardized language test scores, we have implemented a holistic assessment model, evaluating applicants based on their educational background and English medium instruction history. This ensures that students with proven proficiency are not forced to take expensive and redundant tests, a step in the right direction. So, where does that leave us? High-stakes language tests are designed with good intentions, but intentions alone are not enough. The reality is that they are used to prioritize test performance over meaningful language teaching. They reinforce colonial linguistic hierarchies, and they disadvantage socioeconomically marginalized students and non-native English teachers, and they fail to reflect the authentic ways we use language today. Although I speak against the motion today, I'm not suggesting we abolish language tests. I don't think I can walk out from this room safely if I do. And we all know that language tests are here to stay. Instead, an ulterior motive for me to take part in this debate is to urge test developers, language teachers, and educational institutions to work together and think innovatively to ensure the good intention of language tests and the brilliant work of test developers are truly reflected in practice so that students and teachers can benefit. Thank you.
Great response. Thank you very much to Professor Chong. And now it's your time. So we've got 20 minutes for questions, for comments, for your own experience of international assessment. And they covered a lot of topics, and from the importance of international standardized assessment for consistency to inequality, emotional burden, and we've got a lot on social justice, etc. So what are your views and what are your questions? We have 2 mics, each on one side, so just raise your hand. And I'll bring you here. There's one at the very end, I think. Steve, thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting and informative debate. I have one question for Professor Sullivan. I'm curious about the other 14 aspects that he didn't mention. And I was wondering if you would mention 1 or 2 more. Do
you want to come here?
No, later.
Of course. We'll, as a reminder, thank you, Barry, for reminding me as well, that we don't reply straight away. So we'll take notes, and our speakers will reply at the end.
Thank you, speakers, for your interesting presentation and forcefully presenting for the motion and against a motion. So I don't know where my question will be placed, but nevertheless I'll ask. So if we look at the construct of international standardized assessment, they are tools of filtration. So how ethical is it to use it for achievement purposes? Because I presume that if it is going to be beneficial for the two stakeholders, teachers and learners, who do not participate in the design, delivery, interpretation of international standardized assessments, I am presuming that we are also talking about using the tests for achievement purposes. So how ethical is it and how just is it?
Thank you. There's another 2 questions over here, 3 actually. The first one here, thank you.
Thank you for all the insightful ideas. I do have some comments and a question regarding Professor O'Sullivan's saying on the appropriate use of the test. If we think about examples of real international like standardized tests like PISA and TIMSS are nowadays used for the bureaucratic purposes. We come up with league tables of all the countries, who comes first, who comes second, but often there is a sampling problem behind the scene, because if you're sampling, for example, students from Shanghai in China, yes, they are, of course, they will perform better than the rural or less developed areas of China. Sorry about the example, because I personally am from China, so I'm taking an example here. And when we are talking about the appropriate use, most of the time, the reality is the tests are not used for the appropriate way, because we don't want just a league table after the PISA and the TIMSS test. And of course, it happens for the language test that we're using for admission purposes, like the example we've just heard. I really like the example of the feedback, because if we think about that, I don't think it's the fault of the test itself. It's the teacher's feedback techniques that causes the misunderstanding from my perspective, from my understanding. The teacher could use simpler language. The teacher could have a conversation with the students to provide more meaningful and, that meaningful feedback for the learner to take it. So so my question would be, most of the time, we would like the intention, as I said, is good, but the reality is that not everybody is assessment literate to that level, and in such a reality, do we still promote these tests, and what's next? What to do with the assessment literacy of the public, of parents, of students themselves?
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience and for the question. There were another 2 there, I think. One at the very end here, yes. I think there was another one there, and then.
Thank you both. Nick here. My question is for our second speaker. And I'd like to ask you to reconsider, if I slightly rephrased this sentence here, whether you would reply the same to all the points, and how you would perhaps nuance what you've said. So if we said, this House believes that international standardized assessment benefits some learners and teachers, but not all, how would you respond to that?
Thank you. There was one over here and then another one over there, so please.
When I worked for the British Council in Pakistan, the money made from the exams operation in that country was used for development purposes. It was funneled back into developing the English language education system. That doesn't happen in all countries. So how do you justify the vast profits made from the English language testing systems that are used around the world, and what happens to that money?
Thank you. A question over there, yes.
Yes, hello. I'm wanting to ask whether, we're looking at the benefits for both learners and teachers. I work with healthcare professionals, and when we consider the occupational English test, or OET, we're looking at the benefits beyond the learners and the teachers. We're looking at the benefits for patients and patient safety. And I think that OET is an excellent example of how, we've looked at the environment in which these future doctors, nurses, podiatrists, and vets are going to be working in. And we've taken criteria from those professions and implemented them into a test of English that ensures patient safety and also empathy and reassurance, etc. And so we're preparing our learners, our candidates, for the real world in which they're going to be working in. So I think, I wasn't a test believer before I started working in healthcare, but now I definitely am, because we're talking not only about learners and teachers, we're talking about patients and our parents and grandparents, etc. I could go on.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience. Another two over here in the middle. Yeah.
Hello, and thank you for your insights and ideas. But my question is this. I'm a teacher former, and always worried about these soft skills and these 21st century skills, yes, to promote critical thinking, active listening, and the proportion of time that we spend in the classroom, yeah, it shouldn't be for preparing future teachers for presenting a test, I think. Yeah. So what happened with these soft skills that we are promoting, learning with example, and then, oh my God, teachers or future teachers, pre-service teachers, think that we are wasting time because they need to be prepared for a test. So how can we respond to the standardized and the context-based needs? Because we are forming humans before teachers.
Thank you. And if you pass along the microphone to the middle, or there's one there first, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for both statements. And if I understood both correctly, you're both in favor of standardized tests. The difference lies in the word international. And that I find, to me at least, seems a symptom of the tanker taking a long, long time to get around the bend. Because research, as far as the development of the English language is concerned, is far progressed from this implicit British American standard, whatever that means. So standardized tests in a regional or local context can follow exactly the same rules which you mentioned, Barry, and which we all accept, of course. But they don't always do the test takers the benefit they claim they do, I'm afraid. So I would be interested to hear your response to that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for both your perspectives. I just wanted to make a comment about the fact that these tests exist, and they probably exist for a reason, and there seems to be a need. So for some kind of international standard on which we can measure. So I think we have to criticize everything to try to make it better. That's absolutely, without question. So that's not an issue at all. And I think there is quite a lot of research done into these tests as well to try to make them better and try to improve them. But if we were to take away some sort of international standard, what would replace it that could give us that internationally recognized guarantee about the standards of students in the language? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. Barry, you said that you were only going to talk about appropriate tests. Do you believe that there are appropriate tests? Is that the assumption? And for Sin-Wang, I felt myself quite convinced with what you were saying, and then you said, oh, but by the way, tests are here to stay. So what are the alternatives?
Thank you. I think there's somebody there, yeah.
I'd like to ask both speakers to talk about the impact of AI on international standardized assessment and whether advanced AI will mean that maybe this House will believe that international standardized assessment will benefit learners and teachers in the near future because tests will be more accessible and more affordable.
Thank you. There's another one in the middle, further down. Yes. And then one last question, I think we...
Thank you so much for your sharing today and a lot of insights as well. I do have one question each for each of you. So for Dr. Barry, so you were saying that appropriate tests, if used appropriately, would benefit both learners and teachers. But let's say if it's used inappropriately, would you stop it or would you do something? So for example, I'm from Vietnam, and in Vietnam, a lot of high schools or institutions nowadays use IELTS as a standardized test for their entries to the universities, but it is a local context. So why would they need like an international standardized assessment for their entry, or maybe free admission to the school? So if that is, I don't know why, but not all students going abroad or using the language level for their all subjects at school or in university, would you let it happen and, you know, would you filter that to make sure that this is in the right purpose? And a smaller question related to expenses there was, you say, for example, IELTS, let's say, is an example of standardized test, is an accurate description of candidates' language competency. How certain are you about that? Is it to all learners? Because I talk to a lot of people, for example, they come to the UK and they say that I've got my classmates who have really little English, but they still can get through and go to the UK to study master degrees, but they struggle with English. If they get 7.5 points in IELTS, then how can they struggle with that? Because it's considered to be C1 level. Yeah. And for Dr. Sin-Wang, Chong, given that, even when I say so, it's a question in me that I know it's really expensive and really hard to create something consistent to assess people's level in English language. But it left me with a question that how can we make sure it's still affordable to everyone and it doesn't leave a lot of burden on people in a country if we don't have a standardized test. So, yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. I think there's another one. Okay, we have time for a final one. Thank you.
How are you supposed to respond?
Hi, I'll try and keep it brief. Thank you very much. So, speaking as somebody who may or may not be an examiner, I'm not contractually obliged to say either way. I've noticed, and lots of people noticed in the past couple of years, as AI and electronic stuff has become increasingly more popular, the incidences of student malpractice and the ways in which candidates have been attempting to go around the rules when it comes to testing.
Can you place your microphone closer? Thank you.
Is that okay? Sorry. Yeah, talking about malpractice, both from candidates and from test centres, because as there have been incidences where it has occurred. With AI becoming more and more common, a lot of tests are having components where the candidates can take it in-home or in an environment of their choosing, and not necessarily is it always possible to be able to be completely vigilant of whether there's any student malpractice, any AI being used, or so on and so forth. My question basically for both of you is, to what extent does malpractice, both either by candidates and by test centres and so on, to what extent does that impact on the validity of these international tests, and how can it impact learners and teachers?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for your contributions, for sharing your experiences as well, and from your views from your own countries. That's great to hear. So now we have our speakers that are going to revert their order. They are going to close the debate and do their final summing up of their points, taking into consideration your questions and hopefully answering to as many as possible. But we revert to the order. So the first person to go for the response is Professor Sin-Wang Chong. Welcome.
Thank you very much for all the questions. I'm not sure whether I have successfully jotted down every single one of them. I hope Barry got some of them so that he will cover later. But I think the theme seems to be about the dichotomous view presented in this debate format. I'm not a fan of debate because I do think that there are more than two sides of everything in this world, including language tests that have existed for a very, very long time. That's why I try to stick to my task, at the same time trying to introduce a little bit of the nuance there in my position. I'm not against language tests. I used language tests. I have administered language tests. I've taken language tests. I've benefited from international standardized tests. So it's not fair to say that it's useless, it should be abolished, and it's just pure evil. That's not what I meant. But at the same time, I think we also have to be critical and to reflect on how international standardized tests are being used around the world. So the nuance here is it's the intention versus the actual use. You think about Barry and colleagues, at different testing organizations, they spend so much time, there's so much expertise devoted to developing, refining, validating tests. It's not just a business, right? It's challenging, it's huge, it's important. But what's happening around the world is that the tests are being used in a way that they're not designed to be used. A lot of you talk about standards, and people talked about whether standards are good, and Barry said that being standardized is good. And one of you asked me the question, what's the replacement if we don't have any standard? My response is that I don't have any issue with standards. I have issues with what are the standards and who get to say what are included in the standards and why they are important and to whom. So I think that is a question that I think we all should think about, and I don't have answer for that, of course, but I think it's a collective question. And the second question comes to what Barry said earlier. Barry talked about designing tests well, delivering tests well, interpreting tests well. And I think the issue sometimes lies in interpretation. I think we all have been a marker for language tests or an assessor or at least a test taker when you're presented with a rubric and you're asked to mark a few scripts based on the rubric, and in standardization meetings, you all know what happens in those meetings. Yeah? So we all have different understanding of standards, even though exemplars are presented to us and efforts have been put in place to ensure that our views are consistent. So that's my first response about being standardized. I think having standards are good, but what are the standards and how should we interpret the standards? The second response has to do with the word use. Some of you ask whether, it will not be an issue if teachers learn how to use the test appropriately, to be part of the formative assessment program, to give extensive feedback, meet with students one-on-one to explain stuff and to use it, to incorporate it into your curriculum. We can say all these things. I think we all think about what teachers ought to do. or what students ought to do. They should not be attending private tutoring classes. They should just be focusing on the linguistic aspect of it, but not the drilling, not the exam prep aspect of it. Teachers ought to do things differently. But I think a question I would pose out here is how much freedom and autonomy do teachers have when it comes to supporting and helping students to prepare for a test? As Barry alluded to from his personal experience teaching a long time ago, part of the job is to get them help them go through the test, excel, succeed. That's part of your job. And in order to do that, you have to test a test. You have to drill and pass papers. That's what you need to do. It's not about critical thinking skills, other soft skills that some of you mentioned. It's not about that. It's about passing that test. That's how it's used. If you ask people around you, that's how it's used. My last point here, it's about reliability. Okay, about AI. Does it enhance reliability of the test administration? I just want to share a quote from a recent conversation I had with a TOEFL rater who has worked for TOEFL for over a decade. And this is their exact words about AI scoring challenges. And that's what's called E-rater by TOEFL. He said, sometimes I would say rarely, maybe once every 4 or 5 scoring sessions, I would get a response that I strongly suspected to be designed that was designed to confound the E-rater based on the way it was written. They were syntactically coherent, but they weren't semantically coherent. They could usually be deferred to test development. E-rater would give those responses strange scores, sometimes a much higher score than they would deserve, because one of the things that E-rater, at least at the time, couldn't tell was whether or not something was true in the real world. So I think my last point is we're all excited by what AI can offer. Its affordances, but I think we still need to be critical about how it's used in international language tests. But just to sum up, I think my position and Barry's position, we are very similar in terms of acknowledging the value and the hard work of language test developers. But my argument lies in how we can use the test in a way that truly reflects the hard work and the devotion and the intention that it deserves. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And let's welcome Professor Barry O'Sullivan.
Thank you. Too many bloody questions, folks. Well, first of all, I wanted to make some comments on the initial presentation. I think we need to understand that there is evidence out there that these tests actually do predict well what a person is going to achieve in the real world. I think Barkuri 25 in language testing just a couple of months ago had a very interesting study that was undertaken in Canada, which showed some really interesting evidence. I think the native speaker model is kind of redundant now. Realistically, modern tests, like I designed the aptitude test 15 years ago with a non-native speaker model. So the speakers in the test tend to be non-natives. Accents that you're likely to come across in the UK, actually. And quite a few international tests are now moving away from a traditional native speaker model, which I think is a really positive thing. It's absolutely necessary because, listen to me, I'm Irish. Am I a native speaker? Do I sound like, what is a native speaker? Look at her. Bloody Americans. Are they native speakers? Well, natives, no. Speakers, maybe. I think in terms of what exam boards can do, I think if you look at, and I just single out my own organisation, the British Council, okay, there are certain things that the British Council charges for, but if you actually look at the website, you find masses of freely available information for students and for teachers, and webinars and all kinds of stuff that we give away, which I think is part of what we should be doing, and I believe that all exam boards should be doing the same. I believe that exam boards should be never charge for access to past papers, for example. That should be freely available to everybody. I think that should be the way. And And if you look at the teaching situation and the examiner situation now, even in an organisation like BBC or IELTS, you'll find that the vast majority of the people involved are not native speakers of English. Now, you lads threw 8 questions my direction. I think I might have missed one. I'm going to see if I can get through in about 4 minutes or 3 minutes some of these questions. Some of the extra areas, professional standards to help teachers to develop professionally themselves, both as teachers and as examiners within their own context. Design, taking it to a totally different view, the design of the test appropriate to the use that it's going to be made of. The fact that these tests are designed with a specific use context in mind is very helpful to people because they understand more about that, the assessment itself and the use context. Sampling issue with performance associated, somebody asked here about the tables. At the risk of offending somebody, the EF tables, absolute lunacy, because there's no sampling issues. We do massive projects for governments around the world where we do sampling, which is a really complex effort on our side. So, for example, if we're testing language among a population in the country, we'll take a list of all of the schools. We'll then randomly sample from those schools. Then we'll take a list of all of the students in those schools, and then we'll randomly sample from those schools. That's our sample. So we know that a person who comes out at the end of it is representative of everybody else. With these major tests, if you look at ETS, for example, have been preparing these tables for years. But if you actually read the materials that go with it, they'll tell you, don't base any policy on these tables, because the tables are based on the list of people in that country who take the test, and they should not be used for that kind of reason. So that's the other one. So my thinking is that you shouldn't be doing it. You shouldn't publish it at all. You're better off not publishing it because people will misuse it. I think teachers should use simpler language to explain to students. I think that makes sense. But how are they to know what that simpler language is if assessment boards and researchers like me don't help them to understand how to get their ideas across in more straightforward English language? So basically, we now have things going in our research where we take the research papers and then we have them translated into English for people, so that it's basic. You're asked 3 questions. What did I do? How did I do it? What did I find? No statistics, no tables. Unless we continue to do something like that, it's not going to help people. AI. AI. How... everybody talks about how wonderful AI is. And I'm a big believer in AI. I love it. We have a project going into BC at the moment where we've created a bot that you can talk to. You can set up the tasks. We've got 28 different types of tasks now. You can talk to it and it talks back to you. It gives you formative feedback. It's brilliant. It's, as we would say in Ireland, it's class. However, right now we would never dream of using it for an assessment, for a test, because the models that we are using, we don't know enough about. There's only one paper out there ever written on how you examine the underlying model that drives the assessment in a test. And that's a paper that myself and 2 colleagues from the British Council wrote about 2 years ago. That's only one. So nobody, for all of the people out there, you and everybody else at this conference, you should be questioning everything. When you see a test that says, oh, we use AI, how do you use it? How did you build the model? How did you train the model? What data did you use? Is that data appropriate? Nowadays we're finding people who are creating data. So if you don't have enough voices from Tipperary, for example, you go back into your machine and says, give me 1,000 Tipperary accents. And then you put that into your machine and you say, right, now I'm training it to understand Tipperary people. That's crazy stuff. People have been using it for facial recognition for a number of years because they've known that the systems are biased. They don't have enough representation, particularly if you're an elderly black lady. You have very little chance of being fairly treated by these systems. So what did they do when they realized that? They started to create elderly black lady faces to fit the system. And now they're trying to do it with language. Doesn't work. So you have to question everything. We don't know if these systems are biased or not. And the danger is don't know. Test misuse, IELTS, yeah. People misuse tests all the time. I'm not a big believer in using tests outside of the context that they're absolutely designed for. I have to shut up now.
So thank you so much for our speakers. And now it's your time again, as I promised you at the beginning, and it's your time to vote. We have a very sophisticated voting system. You need to take a position. I mean, we did say that it's a very nuanced kind of discussion, but at this time you need to take a position. Now, first we'll vote for the motion for Professor Barry O'Sullivan, and you need to clap. So the claptometer measured your clapping. We will vote for against the motion. Against the motion is Professor Sin-Wang Chong. We are measuring your clapping as we speak, and as you can see, fantastic, amazing, it's impossible, never happens, and you also clash the system. So thank you very much. Thank you so much for our speakers. And thank you to you, the audience. You've been amazing. Thank you. That's it.